Good afternoon, Your Excellencies, esteemed speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to all of you to this high-level panel discussion towards social justice for all in the world of work. My name is Pachari Raksawong, delighted to be here and take on the role of Master of Ceremonies and Moderator. Now, this session today is part of a series of events being held around the world by the International Labour Organization to commemorate the occasion of World Day of Social Justice, which is observed on February 20th of every year. The key objective is to call for joint efforts to accelerate actions and investments toward advancing the social dimension of the Sustainable Development Goals. Social justice is the foundation of peaceful societies that are equitable, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient. And to deliver social justice, what do we need? We need a reduction of inequalities, a renewed social contract, policy coherence, and multilateral coordination, as well as decent work. Today, we will be hearing from a number of distinguished panelists and speakers on what they think needs to change to move the needle on social justice in this Asia-Pacific region, with a particular focus on the world of work. Now, it is also very timely that we're all here, as it comes soon after the agreement by the ILO's governing body to launch a social justice coalition that will help intensify collective efforts to urgently address social justice deficit. Kun Pairo Jotika Setian, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Labour.
เรียนคุณกินเบิร์ตเอฟเฮงโบผู้อำนวยการใหญ่องค์การแรงงานระหว่างประเทศคุณชิโฮโกะอาซาดะมิยากาวะผู้ช่วยผู้อำนวยการใหญ่และผู้อำนวยการสำนักงานแรงงานระหว่างประเทศประจำภูมิภาคเอเชียและแปซิฟิกท่านผู้แทนรัฐบาลองค์กรนายจ้างองค์กรลูกจ้างในภูมิภาคเอเชียและแปซิฟิกท่านเอกอัครราชทูตท่านผู้แทนจากองค์การระหว่างประเทศองค์การภาคประชาสังคมและแขกผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านผมรู้สึกเป็นเกียรติอย่างยิ่งที่ได้รับมอบหมายจากท่านพิพัฒน์รัชกิจประการรัฐมนตรีว่าการกระทรวงแรงงานให้มาเป็นผู้แทนกล่าวเปิดการเสวนาระดับสูงเนื่องในโอกาสวันแห่งความยุติธรรมทางสังคมสากลประจำปี 2567 ในวันนี้อย่างที่ทุกท่านทราบดีว่าขณะนี้โลกแห่งการทำงานได้เผชิญกับความท้าทายในรูปแบบใหม่นานับประการซึ่งการที่จะแก้ไขปัญหาความท้าทายดังกล่าวนี้และการนำไปสู่ความยุติธรรมทางสังคมในภูมิภาคเอเชียและแปซิฟิกใต้จึงจำเป็นต้องอาศัยความร่วมมือในทุกรูปแบบนะครับในพหุภาคีจากนานาประเทศการทำงานถือเป็นปัจจัยสำคัญในการสร้างรายได้และรับประกันความเป็นอยู่ที่ดีโดยผู้คนจะสามารถเข้าถึงงานที่ดีและมีคุณค่าได้จำเป็นจะต้องมีความยุติธรรมในสังคมซึ่งจะต้องสร้างความยุติธรรมทางสังคมได้ต้องอาศัยความร่วมมือจากทุกฝ่ายการเสวนาในวันนี้เป็นโอกาสที่ดีที่จะให้ทุกฝ่ายที่มีส่วนเกี่ยวข้องได้แลกเปลี่ยนความคิดเห็นถึงประเด็นที่จะต้องดำเนินการร่วมกันเพื่อมุ่งสู่ความยุติธรรมทางสังคมสำหรับทุกคนในโลกแห่งการทำงานประเทศไทยขอแสดงความชื่นชมท่านผู้อำนวยการใหญ่และองค์การแรงงานระหว่างประเทศที่ได้เริ่มเครือข่ายความร่วมมือระหว่างประเทศว่าด้วยความยุติธรรมทางสังคมหรือ Global Constellation for Social Justice ซึ่งจะเป็นกลไกในการสร้างความผสมผสานความพยายามความร่วมมือกันระหว่างหุ้นส่วนต่างๆในการแก้ไขปัญหาความยุติธรรมในสังคมและขับเคลื่อนการบรรลุเป้าหมายการพัฒนาที่ยั่งยืนหรือ SDGs การสร้างความร่วมมือในพหุภาคีไม่ได้เป็นเพียงรูปแบบหนึ่งของความร่วมมือระหว่างประเทศแต่เป็นกลไกที่มีความสำคัญยิ่งยวดในการสร้างอนาคตที่เป็นธรรมและเท่าเทียม ประเทศไทยขอสัญญาว่าจะร่วมกับนานาประเทศในการผลักดันความยุติธรรมในสังคมโดยเฉพาะในโลกแห่งการทำงานภายใต้วิสัยทัศน์ทักษะดีมีงานทำหลักประกันทางสังคมเด่นเน้นขับเคลื่อนเศรษฐกิจโดยกำหนดนโยบายที่ครอบคลุมส่งเสริมความหลากหลายและรับประกันว่าทุกภาคส่วนในสังคมจะได้รับส่วนแบ่งและผลประโยชน์จากการพัฒนาทางเศรษฐกิจอย่างเท่าเทียมสุดท้ายนี้ผมหวังเป็นอย่างยิ่งว่าการเสวนาระดับสูงในวันนี้จะสร้างแรงบันดาลใจให้ภาคีเครือข่ายความร่วมมือระหว่างประเทศว่าด้วยความยุติธรรมทางสังคมสร้างการเปลี่ยนแปลงไปสู่โลกที่เป็นธรรมและเท่าเทียมซึ่งผมเชื่อมั่นว่าจะสามารถสร้างโลกที่มีความยุติธรรมทางสังคมและไม่เป็นเพียงแค่ภาพความฝันแต่เป็นความจริงได้อย่างแน่นอนขอบคุณครับ
Thank you so very much to Kun Pairo, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Labour, speaking on behalf of the Minister of Labour. Thank you very much to the Thai government's commitment in supporting this cause. Next, we will be hearing the opening remarks from the ILO Director General. Unfortunately, he is not able to join us in person, but he's very passionate about working towards social justice for all, and he wanted to share his thoughts with us. So once again, to the big screens here, and let's go listen to Mr. Gilbert Hongbo's address.
For too long, social justice has been undervalued. Economic demands have overshadowed environmental and social needs. Inequality and divisions have been allowed to grow. This situation threatens all of us. It must change. If we are to reframe our societies and economies to be stable, sustainable, and equitable, we must start with a focus on social justice. Social justice means policies and actions that create equal access to opportunity, that support a green transition which is just and inclusive, that give everyone the basic of a dignified life. My dear colleagues, we have a unique opportunity to bend the arc of history in favor of social justice. But we can only achieve this by working together. That's why we launched the Global Coalition for Social Justice. This groundbreaking initiative has already attracted more than 100 partners from all regions and across the spectrum of multilateral and national organizations, as well as ILO's own constituents. It is a unique partnership. We must now ensure it brings concrete change. Please lend us your support, and please accept my best wishes for your discussion.
You've just heard from Mr. Gilbert Hongbo, the Director General of the ILO. He's further highlighted the importance of strengthening social justice to reduce inequalities and to create equal opportunities for all. Next, what does social justice encompass with regards to the world of work, and what are some of the issues, the challenges that this Asia-Pacific region faces? To put everything into context, I would like to now invite Mr. Ken Shamuva Sharma, the head of the Regional Economic and Social Analysis Unit at the ILO Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. Kun Ken, the stage is yours.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to continue the discussion today by starting with an important quote that universal and lasting peace can be established only if it is based upon social justice. And indeed, social justice is embedded in the Agenda 2030, where we say we leave no one behind. But the 2023 SDG report tells us that at the current pace, Asia Pacific will miss 90% of the 118 measurable targets by 2030. And indeed, when we look at the individual goals, we see that progress has been subdued. We see that climate action, for example, is actually in retrogression. And when we go to the world of work, we see that 80 million workers live in extreme poverty. These are people who work, but are still poor. Even so, we have 1.3 billion people who are working in the informal economy. And we know the decent work deficits that accompany informality. At the same time, even when we know that social protection is the adhesive for social justice, only 44% of the population have at least one social protection benefit in the region. More interestingly and striking is that our children are actually in child labor. We see that 9 million in this region are actually in that sector. And again, the decent work deficits that accompany such labor are huge. But we also see a lot of inequalities. And we see that only 12% of all labor income goes to the bottom half of the workers. But even so, we see that people are willing to work in the region, but they're not able to. And that defines the jobs gap. We have 181 million people who are willing to participate in the labor force, but are not able to. At the same time, we see gender gaps still persisting in the region, with 2.1 times as many women out of the labor force as men. But even so, we see 22% of youth are not in employment, education, or training. This stark reality, dear delegates, begs an important question. And the question is, what can be done to address these challenges and deliver social justice for all? Thank you.
Thank you so much to you, Kun Ken, there. Very powerful slides that he shared with all of us, and most definitely some very alarming numbers. Once again, a reminder that there is so much more action that needs to be done. So let's waste no more time here. We're going to discuss now the solutions and the way forward. We're going to transition into the panel discussion. We've got panelists joining us virtually and on site as well. So for the speakers on site, can you please join me on the stage now, please? So we start now with the panel discussion towards social justice for all in the world of work. Our speakers join us on site, and we have two speakers joining us virtually. So quick introduction. Mr. Kiwa Prasad Bandari, he joins us online. He's the Secretary at the Ministry of Labour, Employment and Social Security, representing the government of Nepal. You hear us loud and clear, Mr.
Yes.
Bandari, and we hear you loud and clear as well. Mr. Bandari was with the National Planning Commission for 4 years and also has experience working with the Finance Ministry. Thank you for being with us. Dr. Syed Hussain Syed Husman, PJNJP. You're the president of the Malaysian Employers Federation. He's also a member of the ILO's governing body. He was chairman of the Confederation of Asia Pacific Employers, also served on the National Wages Consultative Council. You have plenty to share with us, and we're looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Ms. Akiko Gono, you're the president of the International Trade Union Confederation. You're also a member of the ILO's governing body. Now, you've been active in the trade union movement since 1981. fully understanding the difficulties of workers and the challenges that trade unions face. Ms. Rodoro Babaran joins us online there. She's the director of the Human Development Directorate at the ASEAN Secretariat. She's held this position since 2014, focusing on social welfare and development issues. Dr. Srinivas Tata, now you've been with the UN for 16 years. That's how dedicated you are when it comes to building forward better and leaving no one behind. Now, he's currently the director of the Social Development Division of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Thank you for joining us. And we also have Paul Vandenberg, Principal Economist at the Economic Research and Development Impact Department of the Asian Development Bank. His areas of interest include education, employment, and small enterprise. Thank you all for joining us here. Now, we saw already the challenges out there. And this situation, it's been around for a very long time. And we've been working on these issues for many years, for decades. And the situation is little improved, and the challenges remain huge. So for this panel discussion, we really want to focus on the solutions, the way forward, what we should be doing, what more should be done. And there's plenty to unpack, so many dimensions and perspectives to touch on. You have 3 minutes for the first round of questions. We'll have more time. I know you have a lot to say, but simply, how can social justice become a reality in the Asia-Pacific region? Let's start with Mr. Bandari. If we could have your thoughts, please.
Yes, we are planning to strengthen social justice in our country and our region, especially giving greater emphasis on informal sector workers and formalizing informal enterprises to the formal. Because of the COVID, we are experienced with the vulnerability of the informal sector. So we need to protect our worker from each and every vulnerability. So our decision, our plan is to strengthen and giving greater emphasis on the informal sector workers. Another priority for social justice strengthening is improving labor governance, particularly in the labor markets, which is very essential and crucial for tackling the deficit of the decent work. Nepal already signed Decent 20 Work program, so we are focusing and facilitating the transition of informal enterprises to the formal ones through Decent Work Country program. Empowering women and marginalized communities economically is our another area where we are planning to strengthen social justice. The wage earned by the women labor force in their respective country, including Nepal, shows that their spending goes to the family and directly linked with the SDG, and especially for Nepal, we are graduating from LDC. So empowering women in labor market and involving marginalized community economically prospects area is very important. Likewise, addressing economic inequality by various countries' policy and program. We are planning to reducing economic inequality by providing various activities and programs which will directly link people's survival, especially the people who are living in the bottom of the society and they are in the discrimination from entire setting of the society. And last, we want to focus on gender equality and its promotion. Gender-based discrimination in labor market and violence is always a barrier for improving labor market. So our focus is more women can access in labor market and fulfill their potential. Nepal is a country which marks diverse demographic, and achieving social justice is nearly impossible. So our must focus towards in coming days to give emphasis on eliminating discrimination things, improving from the condition of inequality, and promote labor governance better. Thank you.
Thank you for your response, Mr. Bandari. But now let's go over to Dato' Syed. What would you say should be changed in order to make social justice a reality for people in the Asia-Pacific region?
Thank you for the question. I think, social justice is a very broad terminology, yeah? all we need to keep in our minds is that every individual owns to have a decent living, and equal opportunities should be given to them. Now, from our experience, we found that we need to take certain concrete steps. And one of them is to be very sincere to identify what are the areas in your respective countries, and then you can project to the region. In your respective countries, to really sit down and say, where are our people lacking? What is it that we are not doing enough? We need to have a political will to face these things at a very senior level, because it's at the senior level where you are going to make the national policies. And sometimes when you have these policies, you can't just let it roll out and hope things happen. Now, what we have done in Malaysia is, for example, we have sat down and we said, where is our issues? And we realize that what we are doing now is not good enough. We need to do more. For example, one of the biggest issues we are facing is 97.8% of our entrepreneurs are SMEs. They're basically small, okay? And therefore, majority of them have suffered during the COVID, and financially they're not strong. Now, as a government, if you keep going to them and talk to them about social justice, and you ask them to do all these things to make your employees, get a decent living, and that's going to be impossible. So what the government has done is, we've sat down and said at the government level, we need to allocate an X amount of funds to subsidize these SMEs so that they have enough financial resources to put their plans in action to address social justice. It may be motherhood statement, but there's a lot more we can discuss, but that's something we had to do, because to ask SMEs to come up with their own funds to do all these things, that's not going to happen. Yeah. The second thing we have also done is we also realized that gender issue was no longer an issue in Malaysia, because the government had forced that through legislation where we said 30% of our female gender has to be on public listed companies, had to be on the board. And it took us 1 or 2 years. Today we have met that. We have no issue on the gender issues. What we are also now looking at is the other challenge we have today is to address very clearly people with disabilities. When we talk about social justice, most of the time, these are the forgotten people. And I can share with you my personal experience. I'm just recovering from a major surgery, and I had my spine cut up, and I've got 12 screws at the back of my neck. And I'm now using a walking stick. And I appreciate the difficulties, walking up a hill, walking up steps. You will only appreciate when you get into that situation. Although I have been always, in my years, fighting for this. Until it happens to you, you will not understand. So in Malaysia, the government had a policy which says 1% of your workforce must be people with disabilities. Now, we have hit the target. We're now revising the target to move it up to at least 3%. Yeah? So working towards that, and because it is institutionalized and there are lots of audits being done to make sure that these things happen, only when you put elements like this, then the acceptance rates is much higher. Otherwise, you're not going to get this done. Yeah? The other area we are also looking at is, basically we're talking about the gig employees. We realized during the COVID period, a lot of people lost their jobs, and many of them moved into the gig economy, and we realized they were not organized, they don't have social protection, and their working hours were not right in place. So the government has now set up a gig committee where we are bringing all of them together, where we are giving them social protection, where we are funding a lot of programs for them so that they, as any other employees in the formal industries are also covered in the informal industries. We are also working on, we realize that, Malaysia is slowly becoming an aging population. A lot more people have, left their jobs, and, life expectancy in Malaysia is about 75 to 80. And what do we do with this, guys? So we have come up with a program which the retirees can go back into various forms of skill trainings, which is funded by the government, okay, to bring them back into the industry. And when I say funded, how do we come about with this fund? As I said, you must have a political will to do it. In Malaysia, we created a fund called the Human Resources Development Fund. This fund, it comes from tripartite, which comes from employers, the union contribution, employers' contribution, the government contribution. That amounts today to about 20 billion. Out of which we have taken 15% of it to address all these areas, okay? And we hope that with all the efforts we are putting in, we will be able to at least, try and mitigate and improve as much as possible for social justice. The one other issue that we have today is in terms of area. We have a lot of Malaysians living in urban area. We also have a lot of people living in rural areas. And we need to do a lot more to make sure that, the younger students at the rural areas are given the same opportunities as those in the urban areas. So we're working on a lot of this. And I want to end up by saying that if there's no political will, and if all the tripartite members don't come together and own the issue, and don't put measurable targets, and take actions against people who do not deliver, it will not happen if you're going to leave it. So as an employers federation, I've already made it very clear to the government and that any employer who does not meet these targets, let's take action against them. So that's where we are.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Sharing with examples of assisting SMEs, persons living with disabilities, and those in the informal economy. Political will, you said, is very important. Collaboration, funding is also very key. Let's now go over to the workers, the union here. You were elected, Ms. Akiko, president just under 2 years, but you've been very passionate about helping workers for over 4 decades now, so you certainly know their difficulties. What should be done going forward to ensure social justice for all?
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk on these very, very important issues. And for me, the answer is very simple. To let us allow to form the union so that we can make the effort to distribute the fruit of the economic growth for equal manner. But the answer is, we have a clear vision for answer, but it is very difficult to implement. Let us look at Asia and the Pacific region. First of all, there are threats of peace and democracy and democratic values which threaten the social justice to be implemented. And for the social justice to be implemented, as I said, that trade unions should be performed and formed well in a free manner. But when we look at that, for example, ILO Convention 87, which allows that the freedom of association, only 53% of the countries in our region have ratified this very, very important convention. And when we look at 87, that is the 98, that is for collective bargaining rights, only 64%. So, and please don't say that ratification is very good things, but this is only the one measure. Implementation is far more difficult. So you can see that our region, it is not a very bright situation for the trade unions to function perfectly. And not only that, there is a lack of social dialogue, and the ILO is composed of the tripartite, but I may say that usually there is not so many proper social dialogue, and the trade unions are not dealt with by the other two partners. So these are the problems, and also not only that, there is a supply chain problem, decent work in the supply chains, and also, as the former presenter said, that there is an informal work issues in our region, not only Nepal, but in our region, but the 68% of the people are engaged in the informal economy, and so that is a lot to be dealt. And also, social protection is also one of the aspects to be lacking. And so there are so many problems. And gender equality, I heard that in Malaysia it's advanced, but still when we look around the region, there are so many things to be done to achieve the equality of the gender. So what should be the solution? That is the also formation of the union and the ratification of the Convention of the Fundamental Rights. It's a very simple thing, and in order to do that, we need to have a social dialogue. Because for me, it seems that there is a misconception of the trade unions, because sometimes government and the employer may feel that unions which are already demanding the wage hike and so on will be detrimental for the economic recovery or company's performance. Actually, that is not the case. There are so many good examples that trade union can contribute to the economy and also company performance. So I think here also ILO could make a good role, role to play to correct misperception of the trade unions by making the studies and also to give us a lot of opportunity for social dialogues among the tripartite groups. That's my view. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to go now to our panelists online, Ms. Brodoro, representing the ASEAN Secretariat. Now, some are saying that the social development side of the development agenda needs more work. We heard Mr. Gilbert. He also said it's undervalued. Yeah, and because you've been very much, your work has been very much focused on this side, can you please share with us what needs to be done?
So I think the issues identified earlier on during the curtain raiser are very much applicable and very much present in the ASEAN region, in the 10 countries in the Southeast Asian region. And for us to make a dent in moving the needle towards achieving social justice, it's very critical to focus on a lot of these issues, but I'd like to speak about 3 core issues that we are also working on in the ASEAN, at the ASEAN level. So one is the issue of informal employment. It's very high in the ASEAN region. There are large decent work deficits and social protection deficits among informal workers in the ASEAN region. And this has been further exacerbated by the rise of the gig economy, who are now part of this informal employment in the region. Another area of concern is we need to really address the challenges, but at the same time tap into the opportunities of the dual challenges of digital transition, digitalization of the societies and economies, as well as the greening of economies. While, foreseeably they will be creating a lot of opportunities in terms of employment and possibly, better prospects for our societies, but we should not overlook the fact that there are already a lot of labor substitution happening because of this technological advancements, and there's still a large digital divide that we have to plug, and we must ensure that no one is left behind. The third item I'd like to touch upon is the issue of migrant labor in the ASEAN region. There are millions of intra-ASEAN migrants, those going within the region and also outside of the ASEAN region. And in so many instances, we've seen the deficits, the decent work deficits, the social justice deficits, particularly for this sector. So these 3 things are very important. So I think for us to make a dent in addressing these challenges, we have to address those three things. So in the aspect of informal employment, it's very important that member states, all countries must continuously adopt and ensure the responsiveness to new developments in the world of work of their laws, policies, and programs. And uh, ideally, this should be evidence-based and backed up by strong researches and, of course, adequate resources. And on migrant workers, I think it's important to continue the collaboration among countries within the region and beyond, together with tripartite partners and other international partners to ensure to protect and promote the rights of migrant workers. I'm very happy that, for the first time in ASEAN, we have given specific focus, for example, on a segment of migrant workers that have not been, seen and addressed for the longest time. These are the migrant fishers. So now we're developing this guidelines on placement and protection of migrant fishers. And at the same time, we're also working on the ASEAN guidelines on portability of social security for migrant workers. So these two very seminal work that we're doing, we hope we'll be able to advance the work in this area. Another area that I think is very important to make social justice happen in this region is to address the issue of inequality, especially among vulnerable populations. So that includes women. So in ASEAN, we're happy that we have worked so hard in ensuring that gender issues, gender equality is being mainstreamed in all the work of ASEAN across political, economic, and social-cultural pillar. In the labor sector, we are implementing this ASEAN guidelines on gender mainstreaming into labor and employment policies towards decent work for all. And we're already in the second round of reviewing the gender responsiveness of national labor laws, programs, and measures and statistics of the 10 ASEAN member states. So let me stop there. Let me just highlight that we need to focus our attention, our energies, and of course, I agree as well with the points raised by earlier speakers about having the political will, having the need to collaborate with social partners, and of course, strengthen our international collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, reiterating collaboration, cooperation is so very important indeed. And also, thank you very much for sharing all those guidelines. Now, there are so many guidelines out there, frameworks, and I have here also the resolution concerning inequalities and for the world of work here. I mean, it all looks so good on paper. Dr. Srinivas, this one is for you. How can we translate all this into action and really move forward towards social justice for all and making this a reality?
Thank you very much for that wonderful curveball that you throw to us. And when I speak after so many great speakers, I hope I don't sound or taste like water after fine wine that they've served you. But I also apologize if I sound like a Shinkansen bullet train because I'll be going fast. First, I think being acknowledgement on paper is important. Like, I definitely see the need for increased and explicit acknowledgement that social justice is at the heart of, should be at the heart of development, whether it be economic, social, or environmental. And we are seeing that happening. It happened thanks to, I think, efforts of ILO. It's gone beyond ILO declarations. It has now moved into a GA declaration that was adopted in December, which uses the same language. It says social justice is the foundation for overcoming inequalities and advancing a people-centered approach to development, and that social development and social justice cannot be achieved without peace and security. Now, that acknowledgement in itself is important because this didn't find itself in the SDG declaration. It's implicit in our LNOB, leaving no one behind. But now the word appears extensively, especially in this follow-up to Copenhagen. Words are important to push also, to put it in the minds of people. Number two, how do we move ahead? It's important that our policies And our prescriptions are based on the fact that you need to go beyond averages. And you need to address inequalities. And we in the UN system, it's our duty to really provide the tools to member states. We in SCAP have developed something called a Leaving No One Behind tool, which actually uses a mix and DHS data. It's an example of a tool which cuts across, we have data right now from 30 to 40 countries in our region, cutting across a range of SDG indicators to show who is left behind and to go beyond averages. So the need to go beyond averages. Number 3, we need to understand that social justice can only be achieved if you address inequalities throughout the life course. You can't just have, if you want to address social justice, ensure social justice in terms of decent work and employment, the action has to start long before. For example, employment, the women and men, youth not in employment, there's a big differential, gender differential. 12% of youth are right now, male youth are not in employment as compared to 32% of female youth. Why? Because our data, when we studied it across a range of 10 SDG indicators, the disparity begins right from birth registration, where more boys are registered. It starts from education. It starts from access to ICT across. So unless you address those disparities before, you can't really address it at the end. So need to address, if you want to achieve social justice in terms of decent work, start the work earlier. Yeah. Number 4, acknowledge that social justice is intricately linked to economic and environmental justice. You can't have social justice without having your economic policies directed towards it. You can't, otherwise they'll merely remain words and aspirations. You need to incorporate social justice into our environmental energy transition. You talk energy transition, you don't have just in there, it doesn't make a meaning. So we need to acknowledge that these 3 are linked. And I would like to just pick up on something that everyone has mentioned. The biggest solution is universal social protection. And the biggest barrier in our region is informality. But listen, informality, there are solutions. We sometimes throw our hands up and say, we have to find a way, and there are pilot projects, but countries have shown in Turkey, for example, that we have gone over 19 years, they've addressed informality in the non-agricultural sector and reduced it by half. So I think there are good examples by enforcing labor, ensuring that companies register, and also having proper enforcement. Thank you very much, and thank you very much to my co-panelists here for mentioning persons with disability. We work on that, and my gratitude to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your response. We're now going to go over to Paul. Can you please, now considering the changing landscape as well, the future of work and all these mega trends, what would your response be in ensuring social justice is a reality?
The key issue for me is informality in the labor market. Because if we want social justice, informal labor is not about social justice, it's social injustice, because people don't have the opportunity, they don't have the protection, they don't have the situation that ensures social justice. So the question really is, so how do we deal with the informal labor market, right? Because ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to shift from a labor market that has a lot of informal labor to a labor market with less informal labor or no informal labor. How do we do that? And I think that's a question that a lot of us have been thinking about for years, and I don't know if we fully have the answer. But it is important. How do we make that shift, right? And I say this because my view is that in many countries in Asia, we have labor regulation, labor policies, and social protection in the formal labor market. So if we could get people into the formal labor market, they would be covered and they would have decent work. So that's the idea. How do we do that? Well, I think it's a number of things. One is it comes from 2 sides. Can we somehow help to formalize informal enterprise, build them, make them stronger so that they have the capacity not only to be in the formal sector, but by being in the formal sector to provide the labor protection, the labor support that they need. So how do we transition enterprises to the formal sector so that they can fall under the regime of labor protection and therefore protect those? So I think building strong, it may sound like a circuitous way to get about it, but building stronger enterprises, small enterprises, micro enterprises, is probably very important. And then the other thing is the reach of government and the social protection that we have under labor legislations to meet the workers in the informal economy, right? So we don't have to formalize all enterprises. We can try to see if we can get that social protection, that labor protection, to reach into the informal economy, right? And we think about things, and my colleague talked about this a little bit. He talked about gig workers, okay? Someone else talked about migrants and portability of benefits, okay? Can we establish, or we need to establish social protection, social insurance, social assistance that can reach in and be provided to informal workers? I think that's very important. I'm just going to touch on one other aspect. So I think the big issue is informality and how to deal with informality. The other issue I think that's very important is women's discrimination in the labor market. And that occurs not only in the informal labor market, but also in the formal labor market, okay? In terms of hiring practice, pay practices, and promotional practice. How do we deal with that? I think there's really two sides to it. One is, and my colleague talked a little bit about it, what we need to do is we can set targets, we can set quotas, we can set measures in society to try to do that, to try to encourage that, to make sure that there's not discrimination, to make sure that active promotion. And you talked a little bit about CEOs or board members on boards and setting targets and setting low targets and then moving up the targets, which I think is valuable. So there's one aspect there of trying to, through affirmative action, promote that, right? Reduce discrimination and promote women. I always think, though, that the problem of gender discrimination is really a problem of men, right? Because it's men's attitudes that affect hiring practices, they affect pay practices, they affect promotion practices. We, the Asian Development Bank and other institutions, we always have these, gender promotion programs. And often the participants are women, or the objectives are women. And I always think we should have gender promotion programs for the men, or, in addition to that. Because we have to change attitudes. We have to change attitudes of men, because we're pretty awful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your response there. Right, so that's going to end the first round of questions. And now I have a bit of time left here before we take questions from the floor. But I just wanted to come back to this point here. So we all agree that collaboration, that cooperation is very important. Investment is also very important. Dato, you mentioned that. And I think that education is also very, very important. Now, Ms. Rodoro, your Human Development Directorate oversees education, poverty eradication, gender, etc. And we should be investing more, no? And also, Doctor, you mentioned that we need to start early. Actually, Mr. Gilbert, he also mentioned in one of his speeches that it's time that we really rethink education and ensure that they're learning for the future of the changing landscape of work. And digitalization is coming in. If we could touch more on this. Maybe, Rodora, you wanted to start because you were also responsible for the Philippine Cash Transfer Program that was aimed at alleviating immediate needs of the poor, investment in human capital, targeting children.
Yes, indeed. Addressing social justice requires multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder collaboration. It's not just among governments, it's a whole of society. Even the individuals, the people themselves, the families, the societies, all have to work hand in hand. And this is an approach that we are adopting in ASEAN. So while it is recognized that states are the primary duty bearers, it also has to work closely with all stakeholders. So in the aspect of education, which is fortunately in ASEAN is also under my purview, we are doing a lot when it comes to addressing challenges, preparing our human resources for the future of work. It was, I think, some 2 years ago when last year, sorry, when the ASEAN Ministers of Education adopted this declaration on digital transformation of education in ASEAN. And in other sectors as well in ASEAN, there have been related and complementary policy pronouncements that aim to enhance the readiness of ASEAN as a whole when it comes to emerging challenges, emerging future of societies and of work. So not just in the education sector. So it's in the labor sector, of course. So it's very important to reskill, upskill, and to promote lifelong learning. I also want to uh, uh, build upon the point earlier raised by Dr. Tata that if we want to address the challenges of the workers of this generation or next generation, we have to work throughout the life cycle so much earlier than that. If we also want to address the issues of aging society or aging workforce, we have to start way earlier than that. So in all those areas, ASEAN has been working, and we're very proud that we have made headway in terms of our regional aspirations. But going back to the earlier point, it's very important to keep the momentum, invest, put our resources, and couple it with the political will. Thank you.
Yes. Akiko, you wanted to add?
Thank you very much for a very important question, which is reskilling and education and so on. For the workers also, we really feel that it is very, very important, especially we are facing the digital economies and the platform economies, and we feel that there are so many workers in the future with the skills, but there are not so much protection to which they are to be given. So for that manner, we also feel that lifelong learning and also protection for those workers is very, very essential. And for that matter, I come back to my original point, social dialogue, and also inclusion of the workers in discussing how to face with the skilling and skilling issues, lifelong learning issues is very important. And as for the social dialogue, as I said, that there are not so many proper social dialogues going on. So I just want to appeal that in every aspect, like economic policy or social protection that you mentioned, and also UN project, the proper social dialogue, including the proper union, is essential. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Dr. Sinivat, you would like to add, the ILO is actually working a lot, the UN in general is working a lot in terms of all these aspects as well. And you also mentioned the life cycle approach, etc.
If you'd permit me, I'd like to pick up on one specific issue. I mean, just using persons with disability as an example. Actually, when you look at the incidence of prevalence of disability is grossly understated often because of the ways we measure. Actually, if you go by WHO definitions, 15% of the population suffers from some form of disability. And as we go into a rapidly aging population, you're going to have more and more persons who will be disabled. But the fact remains that you need to, especially persons with disability, we're going to prepare them for the labor market. You have 1% or 2% reservations, but often you'll find that they go unfilled. Sometimes companies would rather pay the fine for not employing persons with disability because they don't find appropriate positions for them. I think it's incumbent upon us to prepare, and this applies for persons with disability and young people in general. One, preparing them for the labor market. I think that happens in general, I think with digitalization and the shift to green jobs. The biggest need of the hour, and I think Akiko-san did refer to it, is reskilling and active labor market policies. There has to be a big investment on it, and especially in the context of persons with disability, even more important. We are working with ILO, we have networks working with business to try and understand what needs they have so that persons with disabilities can be trained so that they're economically empowered. So I think we need to really focus on reskilling and active labor market policies if you really want to ensure social justice. Otherwise, we'll have a huge cohort of young people, otherwise we're not really fitting into the jobs that are available.
Yes, Dato, please.
Can I just add on further to what you've just said? But at the end of the day, I've always believed that we must be very clear, committed, and to take action and not leave it to the society to address this thing. Now, when you come to people with disabilities, fully agree with you. It's not only just physical disabilities. There are many forms of disabilities, and one of the things I just about a month ago, we launched a seminar on successful women with disabilities in the industry. And the whole idea was to brand this thing, to educate people, so more and more people become fully aware of, this whole group of human beings out there who are suffering from some form of disabilities. In fact, in April of this month, we are going to run a national conference on disabilities where we are going to invite the Prime Minister to come and address this. At the same time, we have been speaking to the government where we said, like in business, at the end of the day, you need to know what's the bottom line. You must have the carrot, you also must have the stick. If not, it's not going to happen. So we are now working with the government in many fronts, one of them really working with all the building association to try and ensure that the future buildings that are going to come up clearly has facilities for disabled people. And those that do not have, to really look at the design and make possible with new modifications where grants are available if that organization doesn't have the funds. We are also working on various training and retraining program, reskilling program for disabled people. As I said, it comes from the National Training Development Fund that all the tripartites have put in place, and 15% of that is coming out, and that's 20 billion. We take 15% and we divide among the various skills, and there are many things we're doing, but at the end of the day, what I'm saying is, if you do not address it in a very clear, very structured manner, where you reward organizations that do it and take action against organizations that don't do it. Now, for example, in Malaysia, the government is also seriously come out with a new taxation benefit for employers that meet the hiring of the people with disabilities. We are also giving organizations wage subsidies. For example, today we are saying that, look, 30% of your wage for a disabled person will be paid by the government. Yeah? So if you don't take all these measures, that will not happen. Reward where it's due, take action where it's due, and continuously try and promote the idea, that this is an issue that we all have to work for. Now, that's on the people with disabilities. Let me come to gender. And you're absolutely right. The problem is with the males. All my life, I learned from women. My grandmother was a great teacher. My mother was a great teacher. In all my careers over the years, I worked all my life in multinationals. All my bosses were ladies. And what I am today is partly due to them. Okay? And the greatest teachers, I still feel, are the ladies, are the women. And that's the reason why I said in Malaysia we have met the 30% requirement on listed companies. Today is purely on meritocracy. You have enough companies in Malaysia where the female gender is more than the male on boards. So that's not an issue, but we got to continuously work on it and address it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your positive examples there coming from Malaysia. Let's go back to Mr. Bandari online. Perhaps you can share with us some examples as well from Nepal.
Yeah, thank you. For social justice, many countries has to improve their legal system. Still, there are some lacks. How we create policies that directly address to the people who are living in the bottom of the society. We have to address them for social justice, and we have to create human face in our development activities. Otherwise, it's very hard to achieve social justice. For Nepal, we already launched a social protection program, contributory social protection program for the informal sector level, and even we launched this program to our migrant worker who works abroad. So that also creates some justice towards our labor force, and skilling and upskilling the capacity directly linked to the education system. Especially the labor-intensive training program is focused for our labor force. So these are the area which we can focus that will upgrade the situation of informality to formalizing this and the country's development target, SDGs, LDC graduations, and others. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul, is there anything else that you would like to add, perhaps?
A couple of things I'd like to talk about. I think when you talk about education and training, it's good to try to link it with social justice. And the way I see it is thinking of education training, and in a sense, as a social right, right? Should you have the right? And we have had this campaign, parts of the world, about education as a right, thinking of education and training as a right. And I think that's a good way to think about it. But if you go to particular aspects of it, you can see it even more. And I just want to highlight, talk about climate change, the energy transition, and the just transition, right? And so if we have trends in society, such as the energy transition, where we're moving to cleaner energy, that causes dislocations. And social justice there is education. It is about saying, look, these people who need to transition in terms of employment, they should have the right to education, to retraining, so that they can transition to other jobs. Okay? And I think that's important to try to understand that. There are a lot of other trends that happen in society, digitization, mechanization, automation, the non-energy aspects that are affecting agricultural production and so on. If we see those as challenges, I think we should also see as a social right the training that can help those people, protect them, and help them make a transition to new forms of employment. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panelists. Plenty of food for thought and takeaways, points to ponder there. Thank you so much. And that's going to wrap up our session here. Now, I'm sure you'll all agree with me, that was very thought-provoking. So let's extend a big round of applause to our speakers. I would like to now invite to deliver the closing remarks Ms. Shihoko Asada Miyakawa, the ILO Assistant Director General and Regional Director for Asia Pacific, to take to the podium, please.
Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to address you at the closing of this event marking the World Day of Social Justice 2024. First and foremost, I would like to thank everyone for their valuable participation. I must specifically recognize the Royal Thai government, the government of Nepal, the ITUC, the Malaysian Employers Federation, the ASEAN Secretariat, UNSCAP, and Asian Development Bank for your contribution. Your participation is testimony to your commitment to social justice. It was gratifying to hear from all the panelists. Your message resonated with the core tenets of the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly that of leaving no one behind. In essence, The pursuit of social justice requires us all to come together and positively contribute to the betterment of humanity. We can and must work towards a world free of injustice. We must also take a human-centered approach, one which places at its heart a respect for universal human rights, equal access to opportunities, a fair distribution of resources, and a just transition to greener economies. Everyone has a role to play, and this is why the ILO is promoting the Global Social Justice Coalition. Since being established by the governing body of the ILO in November 2023, the coalition has already attracted its first 100 partners. These include governments, employers and workers' organizations, international organizations, academic institutions, and international NGOs. But this is just the start. Achieving social justice will take time and require concerted efforts from us all. This event has highlighted a number of important steps that we can and must take to move along this pathway towards our shared goal. Let today mark the beginning of the renewed commitment to social justice, one which sees us energize our collaborative efforts to make the Asian Pacific region more equal, more peaceful, and more inclusive. Once again, I thank you all for your participation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shihoko, for your closing remarks, summed up so well. And that is going to officially wrap up this high-level panel discussion to mark World Day of Social Justice 2024. I'm going to leave you with a quote here from Nelson Mandela. As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest. So don't rest. Keep working hard, everybody. Social justice for all. I'm Pachari Raksa Wong. Sawadee ka.